So I want to talk about difficult conversations. Want to talk about this whole question. And a good place to start is to get you to think a little bit about a recent difficult conversation you had. Think about the difficult conversation. Think about what happened and what made it difficult. I'm not going to ask you to share that with me. If we were in a room together, I would get some examples from you. But I'm just going to ask you to cast your mind back and think a little bit about it. What was it about it that was difficult? Was it difficult for you? Was it difficult for the other person? What was it about that? And I think that's a really good place to start, right? To think about what really happened and what was causing the difficulty. When I think back to some of mine, I've had I was a dean here for a couple of years, and if you're a dean, you have a lot of difficult conversations. Thinking about some of those. Conversations with faculty who are unhappy, conversations with students who are unhappy. There's always a lot of emotion. There's always a lot of that's something, and depending on your personality, you are more or less comfortable with people who have a lot of emotion, who are unhappy. There's something called need for affiliation. If you're high on this need, if your personality is that means you really like to be liked. So if you're a person who likes to be liked, then difficult conversations are often difficult because you experience someone not liking you. So depending on your personality, that may be more or less important to you. But often it's also because there's a difference of opinion, right? That you and someone else doesn't agree about something. And I'm going to give you some examples of those in a minute. But it's really something about emotion and something about disagreement. I think that's really important. It can also be because these are some kinds of conversations. These are really hard to actually come to a conclusion. So the things that go on and come up again and again, there's a disagreement which we simply can't kind of resolve. So that's something about that too. So difficult conversations, something about emotion, something about they're not really easy to resolve often. That really can create a kind of conversation you want to avoid, a kind of conversation that you want to get, sort of not even have is often what you're looking for. Oops. Okay. At the same time, it's not really possible to escape these conversations. If you're a leader, you're in a position of responsibility. You're required to have some of these conversations. Leadership brings with it the necessity of disappointing people. There's a couple different ways that as a leader you might run into these. One is that you might be sort of having to disappoint someone, right? So it's this really, or there's a disagreement over something, resources or something within the organization that you're in. It can be trying to deal with people external to the organization, disappointing them. Someone who you was hoping to have a contract renewed, someone who was hoping that they could join the organization, someone who is, you're disappointing them. So there's those kind. And then there's also ones where you're actually trying to mediate between other members of your organization, and there's a difficult conversation that's happening where you're mediating that conversation, either people who are not getting along, who are having a conflict, and your job is to mediate. Those are all different kinds of conversations that can be problematic, but they are not necessarily fundamentally different, and a lot of the same ideas work for all of them. So let's just talk a little bit about what kinds of conversations occur, what's the commonality between them, and how can we handle them better? So what are some of the kinds that occur? Resource constraints, right? My team needs more space. People believe, and this is often around something where they think there's a reason that they deserve more space. So there's a principle at stake. Well, my team has grown, we haven't gotten more space. Some other team has also grown, they've gotten more space. There's often a principle, something about we deserve these resources. There's something that they believe is, and you're having to deal with that and disappoint them. So emotion. Part of it's giving feedback, right? So you're saying to someone, that, I know you've tried really hard, but your performance isn't what we need. Your performance isn't at the level we need. We need to fix this. This kind of feedback can be quite hard to give. Positive feedback, of course, much more pleasant to give. You did great, well done. But sometimes we have to give negative feedback, and that can be a difficult conversation. Disappointing people, again, if you have that high need for affiliation, if you like to be liked, then that can be very difficult. That can be the kind of conversations that you don't look forward to, keep you up at night, that maybe even you avoid. And we'll come back to that in a minute. I won't work with. This is an interesting one where someone comes to you and says, I just won't work with Bob anymore. He's lazy, he's whatever. And then what do? They've told you because they expect you to do something. So you have to have a difficult conversation with someone, either the person that's telling you to say you have to work with this person, or the person that they're refusing to work with, to try to fix the situation. In any case, difficult conversation. I'm sorry you didn't get the raise. I'm sorry you didn't get the promotion. I'm sorry you didn't get whatever. Okay? So this is another one. Again, disappointing someone, that can lead to emotion. Right? This is one, I don't know if you've had, but it's quite a difficult one to deal with. And that's the you don't like me, or you don't treat me fairly, or you've always had it, you've never supported me. These are very personal conversations about you as a leader. And in some ways, these can be very difficult, quite disappointing to hear if you have tried very hard to support the person, and also quite hard to deal with, to try to say, well, I do like you, but how do you show that? So an interesting and problematic conversation. And then simply, I want something. Someone who has something they want a better office, I want a raise, want a promotion, think they deserve it. It can be very difficult to deal with that. These are all cases where there's the same kind of thing happening. So the first thing to think about, the first step, is to really think about whether this conversation has to happen at all. And I think there's a really useful idea of crucial conversations. Some conversations that are difficult and need to be had, versus conversations which aren't crucial. They're difficult, but you don't even need to have them. They're potentially difficult. So in order for a conversation to be necessary, three things must be true. So there's opposing opinions. That's the part that makes it difficult. Strong emotions, that's the unpleasant part, and it's important. There's some sort of high stake. If you have all three of those, then you have this whole idea of a crucial conversation, one you have to have. I think that's really important, because if we take out any one of these, you can see there's another alternative. So let's say we have opposing opinions and high stakes, but not strong emotions. Is this a difficult conversation? Not really. It just means we disagree, and it's really important, so we need to settle it. But we're not having a fight. We're just disagreeing, and we can just sit down and have a rational conversation. Might mean getting more data, might mean getting someone to come in and help us with our analysis, might mean finding new techniques to decide between the two views of the world that we have. But in this case, it's not difficult. It's just important to have it, and it's important to manage it well to keep it from becoming a difficult one. What if we have opposing opinions, strong emotions, but low stakes? So two people, really opposing opinions, very strong emotions, but it doesn't really matter. Well, if you're a leader, you shouldn't be wasting your time on this one. Let the other person have it. Just agree with what they want to do. Let them do it. It doesn't matter. If the stakes are low, you shouldn't be spending your energy worrying about that. And this is we all kind of can fall into the trap of having an argument for the sake of an argument, especially with some people. We just don't want to lose the argument. On the other hand, if it's not important as a leader, it's time to step away from that and just say, it's okay. The color of the loo roll doesn't really matter. If you want pink, I want blue, we'll just have pink. I'm not gonna fight about this. This is a waste of time. So if the stakes are low, don't create this situation. Just give in. In fact, if you're smart, you can keep that as a last time I gave in to you, next time you give in to me, you get a little they owe you thing going a bit. So this can actually be quite useful. If there's strong emotions, high stakes, but no opposing opinions, well, that's not a problem. This is great. We both agree. We're maybe really excited, really enthusiastic, or really scared, but we don't have opposing opinions. So it's not a difficult conversation. We just need to figure out what to do and move forward. It's important. There's strong emotions, but we agree. Not a problem. So really think about the conversation and make sure that conversation if it's difficult, needs to be had. Because a big mistake that leaders make is having conversations about things that aren't very important, wasting time and energy on those things, having conflict around things when it doesn't matter. If it's not high stakes, move on to the next thing and don't worry about that. So keep that in mind. So the first step is always just to make sure, is this actually something we need to actually have a look at or not, right? Over time, I've come across a number of different kinds of difficult conversations, and they're important because I think we think a lot about one kind and we don't think about the other kinds, but they all happen in organizations. So there's three different kinds of difficult conversations that I've kind of become aware of over time. And I think it's important to be prepared for all of them, but only the first one can you really prepare for. And that's the I have bad news for you one. So this is the kind of one where you have to give someone the news that they didn't get the promotion, or they didn't get hired, or any other thing where you're going to disappoint them, where they're going to be unhappy, where they're going to want to know why, and then you're going to have to defend the decision that's been made. In those cases, the key is preparation and also timing. So making sure you're prepared, you know what you're going to say, at least have thought through what's my first few sentences that I'm going to say, what are the main points I want to make, and then pick a time and a place which is appropriate and will maximize the chance of being successful in managing the conversation well. I'll come to some other ideas about that in a sec, but that's really the one that you can prepare for. It's also one where it's quite useful to make sure your timing is good. So don't put it off, because putting it off is really this is not wine. Bad news is not something that gets better with time. Right? So make sure you can make sure you can pick a moment as soon as you can, but not a moment where other people are around. Just to be thoughtful about timing. People often understand or know that they have bad news coming. So actually, it's good to give people that, to confirm it as soon as possible. But that's not the only kind of difficult conversations you might encounter. A second one is when you're in a meeting or some sort of activity with some other people, and someone in the meeting suddenly decides or comes to the realization or thinks they realize that something's happened or is happening that they haven't been told about. And this one can be quite difficult to manage, because they can often feel a lot of emotion, because they suddenly think, oh, this is already, you guys have already made a decision. You haven't told me, or you talked about this and didn't include me. You've already decided on this, or what do you mean this is happening this way, isn't it? And you didn't. So this is when someone kind of comes to some, or either correctly or incorrectly. If it's incorrect, then the main thing is to focus on getting them to understand that they're incorrect. If it's correct, you have a bigger problem, because then they're unhappy, and they have a right to be unhappy because they feel like you have been hiding something from them. So this is a big one. This is in many ways more difficult than the first one. In the first one, you could pick the time and you could start the conversation. In this second one, they just are reacting to something that they believe they have understood that's happening or has happened. And so in that case, it's about calming people down, and maybe about saying this isn't the time to talk about this. We'll have a meeting later and talk about that, especially if there's external people, clients or other people at the meeting. You may have to manage that. But this is another kind, and it's more challenging because you don't have time to prepare and you're not choosing the time when it works best. The third one is probably the most difficult one in my experience. And this is the one where you're sitting in your office on Thursday morning at 9 o'clock with a cup of coffee, reading the sports on your computer, just getting ready for the day, and somebody knocks on your door, opens the door, and they're visibly unhappy and starts to tell you something you've done, usually, or something somebody's done that's absolutely not acceptable. And now you're the one who hasn't had a chance to prepare, and they've been thinking about this for a week. So in that case, that's really the most difficult one. And the most important thing in that case is generally to calm people down and to break their chain of thought, so to ask questions quickly and clear questions to both show them you're interested, and secondly, to get them to sort of direct the conversation in the direction you want to go. Why do you think that? What happened? And if you may have to say, yes, you're correct, and I'm sorry you're unhappy, but here's why. Like this is when you'll have to be prepared for. It does happen when you're in a leadership position. So that's the three kinds, and as I said, the number one, these are in increasing order of difficulty to handle. And the first case, you have a lot of control. Second case, not so much control. Third case, the other person's been thinking about it, preparing, and they have a big advantage. So you might have to deal with these in quite different ways, but just be ready for them. Okay, let's see. So strategies for handling these difficult conversations, and again, I'm going to talk about all three of these kinds of conversations, assuming that they have to be had. So this is a crucial conversation. We have these three different kinds that occur. Most of these strategies work for all three kinds. So you can sort of keep that in mind as we talk through the strategies. Okay. Okay, next slide. So first of all, a couple of things to keep in mind. Number one is, I think, the most fundamental truth about leadership. The more you are aware of your own leadership strengths and weaknesses, the more you understand what your own weaknesses are, the better you're going to be at these kind of conversations. Because one of the things people very quickly do is figure out how they can push your button. So if you're someone who's very conflict averse, people will learn if they just become conflictual, you'll back off, or they'll learn that if you're really uncomfortable with a lot of emotion, you can expect to have a lot of people crying in your office of both genders, right? So it's just, I mean, you have to think about how do I work? Really be honest with yourself, because in these conversations, your ability to deal with your weaknesses or areas of growth or challenge is really important. I had one person that I worked with who knew that they got angry, so they would just say, I need 5 minutes, and they go and leave and go get a glass of water, walk around, come back and continue the conversation. They knew at a certain point that if they got angry, they would make a mistake. So they would take a break. They would just say, I need 5 minutes. Everyone was used to it. It wasn't a problem. But they were very aware that they had a temper, and that they needed to manage that somehow. That's very extreme, but you can think about what it is about you that could, you and your leadership practice, where's the areas that if you aren't careful, you could trip up in these kind of conversations. So be aware of those and watch for them when you're in these conversations. Make sure you're not tripping up on things that you know about yourself. Right? Whenever possible, preparation is key. That's pretty obvious, but the more, ironically, this is one of those paradoxes. The more nervous you are about difficult conversations, the less you'll prepare. Because when you prepare, it makes you nervous and it makes you feel bad. So you have to break that cycle. So if you're really not looking forward to a conversation, that's the time you need to think a little bit about what are your arguments, how are you going to talk about it, how are you going to approach it? Because that's the time you're going to get it the most wrong. You're going to not want to think about it. That's not the approach, and don't put it off. Right? And then when you do talking to someone and it turns into one of these conversations, or it's already one of these conversations, then I think there's a couple of things to keep in mind. One is that you're not going to get dragged into a conversation about whether the other person is a bad person or not, or about whether you're a bad person. So you're repeatedly saying, especially if it's quite a seriously conflictual conversation, you're saying, I appreciate all you've done for the company. I appreciate all the been working with you. I've really liked working with you. I'm glad we're working together, depending on the situation. But you're not attacking them. You're talking about a particular problem. Right? That means you might also have to keep restating your intentions. Right? So the point of this conversation is to deal with this problem. Right? We keep missing deadlines, or we keep having this issue with quality, and we need to talk about why that is, what's happening, and we have to fix that. This is not about talking about whether I like you. This is not about whether you're a good person or a bad person. It's not whether I'm a good person or a bad person. This is about this problem and how do we fix it. Right? So you have to restate your intention. This conversation is about X. Right? And you're fighting, and when you're having this conversation, you're arguing with their arguments, not with them. Right? So you're not getting to any sort of attack mode where oh yeah, what about you? You did this. No, you did this. It's these kind of very personal conversations that get very personal. They are not productive, and it doesn't solve the problem that you're trying to solve. So keep those in mind, and we'll talk about a few more kind of strategic things now. Okay, now interestingly, when I talk to people, especially ex-students or current students, will come to me to talk about a difficult conversation having, and they often have already engaged in one of the common strategies, and these are common but bad strategies for dealing with difficult conversations. So you should not be doing any of these, okay? One, they don't have it. They avoid it. They don't meet with the person. They just don't. They meet with the person. They don't bring it up. The person is waiting potentially or not. But one thing, the longer you avoid things, some things will go away. And if you think that a particular issue will go away, avoidance is perfectly good. But most of the time, people avoid these conversations because they don't feel comfortable having them. The longer you avoid it, the worse it gets. So don't be avoiding. So avoidance, that's a terrible strategy. If you want to be good at difficult conversations, be timely. as soon as it's practically possible to have a conversation in the right context with the right person, with some privacy, that's when you want to have it. Okay, so avoidance. If you find yourself doing that, say, I'm not going to do this because that's a terrible strategy for dealing with this. Email. How many of you have ever avoided a conversation by sending an email? So it's like, I don't want to say this to this person's face, so I'll just send them an email and then we'll never talk about it. That is, again, if it needs a conversation, it may be an email. There's lots of things which can be communicated by email. Information is perfectly, sending someone a bit of information, trying to organize something. Those are all perfectly good uses of email. But to settle something which is really about having a difficult conversation, email is the most common and most likely to result in even more difficult conversations. People can say all kinds of things in email that they wouldn't say to each other face to face. So try to avoid using email because it starts a chain of emails that just creates all kinds of problems. So avoid email and especially avoid emails with lots of people CC'd. As soon as you see that happening, it's probably not a very good way to do this. So email, most common strategy, and really not a very useful strategy. So be careful. Another one which I like a lot is asking someone else to have the conversation for you. So basically, Bob's really good at these kind of conversations. Let's get him to do it. So that may be a way to deal with the conversation, to avoid having it yourself, but it's not leadership. Right? So what you're basically doing is handing over the leadership of the situation to someone else. And if you want to be a leader, that's not the way forward. It may be functional even if that other person is better at conversations than you, but that really says something about your leadership and the need for you to develop these skills. So if you see yourself avoiding sending an email or asking one of your colleagues to have a conversation, all of those are ineffective strategies for both developing yourself as a leader and also for handling that, for dealing with the conversation, and getting it, you as a leader taking responsibility and making something happen. Being a leader is being responsible for some difficult conversations. Okay, now I have a few more points just about what to do to make, so these are the things not to do, now some more things to do. Be realistic. It is often the case that disappointment and emotion are part of some conversations, and your goal is not to remove those. Your goal is to manage them. So we have to regularly disappoint people, and as long as you're fair and especially clear, and explain things and give, when people don't get a contract, they will want some feedback. Don't avoid that conversation, but be clear on why. They're just like you would want to know, and you would ask questions about why. If they're genuinely trying to understand, then you want to genuinely provide that information. But don't feel like you failed just because there's emotion, disappointment. That's not a failure. What failure is not having the conversation. Right? A failure is having the conversation blow up. But the people are in organizations. There's disappointment sometimes, and the people don't get what they want. It should be a chance for them to understand, to learn, and to move on. Right? And they need to have that conversation with you. Giving people bad news, even if people are being made redundant, there's a way to do it that is effective. It's bad news for people. It's sad for people, but you can do it in a way that is clear, helps them to understand what's happened, and helps them to move on. That's your job as a leader, right? So your goal isn't to get rid of these difficult conversations. Your goal is to manage them well. And if you set yourself that as the goal, that I'm going to manage these in the best, as good as I can, then you can be successful even though the person's upset, right? So your goal is to have an effective conversation, not that you can ever remove all of the emotion and keep people happy all the time. Your job as a leader is not to keep people happy all the time. That's not your job. That can't be. So don't set that goal for yourself or you'll feel like you're failing. And it's not a failure if you're minimizing the emotion and turning it into something positive as much as you can. That's all you can do. So that's your goal, right? I have a friend who he's a lawyer, and he became the managing partner of a law firm. And when he had his first experience when he took over, his first team. He actually had the experience, not later when he became managing director, managing partner. And what happened is he had to tell one of the lawyers that he was not going to be, he was going to be not continue working with the firm. And he went home and he practiced with his wife and he practiced in the mirror. And it was very tough for him because the guy that he was making redundant had been his boss at one point and was when he was a junior lawyer. So it was quite stressful. He had a lot of respect for this guy. And so he started out the conversation telling him, listing all of his accomplishments for the firm, everything he'd done, all the great things, how great it had been, how much he got, new customers he'd landed, to the point where the guy started smiling. And all of a sudden, my friend realized, oh no, he thinks something good's going to happen. He's going to get a bonus or something, right? Because he's got it out so positively. If you have if you have news that's bad, there's a tough message, deliver it quickly. Then you can share the other things. Then you can give context. And you might start out with a little bit of positive stuff, but don't talk about the weather and your vacation and then make someone redundant. If there's kind of message, it needs to be the first few sentences. Then you can spend time explaining, providing context. Or the person may want to go away and have some time on their own before they come back and continue the conversation. But if you have bad news, put it up front. You don't want people chatting about the weather if they're about to deliver bad news to you. You need to just go in and sit down and have a direct conversation explaining to them what's happening. So always have the bad news up front. When you're doing these kind of conversations, and is a very powerful word. You can use and to avoid a whole bunch of kind of distracting conversational gambits by the person you're talking to. So you can say, right, I know you worked all night, I know you want to do well, I know the graphics people haven't delivered on time, I know this, I know that, but that project wasn't delivered to high enough quality. So you can use and to build a front end to your bad news to prevent having to counter all of these things, right? So and is a very powerful word. It doesn't need to be grammatical, right? You're having a conversation, you're not writing a book. So this is just about including all of these things up front, just to say, I know the situation looked like this, but still you didn't do as well as I would have expected, right? So use and that way. It makes you build, and this is where you're preparing, right? You're putting these things together, thinking through, and these can be multiple sentences too, but it's just the idea of building up a picture which prevents lots of sort of distraction as you had to explain lots and lots of explain why they're objections or the attempts to blame others or the distractions that they're using, why they're not applicable. You can just inoculate your news to avoid that. All right. If you get into a conversation where you're trying to decide whose fault it is, and you're having a big sort of get into an argument about whose fault, usually it's multiple people's fault, and usually there's lots of good reasons why things went wrong. What you want to focus on is just outcomes and what's going to happen in the future to avoid the outcome we just had. Right? Whose fault it is? It's not about that. What processes didn't work? What things do we have to improve? How do we avoid this in the future? If we can focus on that, not about whose fault it is, and not letting the other person also blame others. It's not about that. It's like, this is what happened. That wasn't good enough. This outcome isn't good enough. We need to fix it. How are we going to change things in the future so this doesn't happen again? Right? There's another conversation, which is, this was so bad that you're fired. But then again, then that one, it's not about, you were responsible for this. This is what happened. That's a really stressful conversation. It's also important, I think, when we think about timing. I forgot to mention it up front. But if you're still in this, if you're in your head still working through whose fault it is and blaming people and are angry, that's no time for you to have this conversation. You need to calm down, not be unhappy, not be stressed. Have moved beyond that, and then you can. So when you're thinking about timing, it's not just timing with respect to the other person; it's also timing with respect to you, right? And get away from the blame thing. That's not going to help us move forward. It's always forward-looking. This is what happened. This outcome isn't good enough. How are we going to change it? What's going to happen differently next time to make this not happen? Okay. Active listening. The two most important tools we have are this one and the next one are two of the most important tools we have. Paraphrasing. If you want people to believe that you're listening, paraphrase back what they're saying. Say to them, okay, so if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying the following. That doesn't mean you're agreeing with them, and you're clearly saying that it's about your understanding of them. You're not saying, oh yeah, I agree with you, that's what happened. You're saying, if I'm understanding you properly, this is what you're saying. Is that right? And then you tell them. That is very powerful. And it's powerful for a couple of reasons. One is it gives people the impression you're listening. Two, it cognitively engages them. And you ask them, am I getting this right? It takes their focus off of them and puts it onto you and onto you speaking, which calms them down, right? So this is actually really powerful. And when there's a lot of emotion, to paraphrase, because people have to listen. And the way you say it is probably going to be much less emotional than the way they said it. So if you paraphrase back, it stops them speaking for a minute, makes them focus on you, makes them engage another part of their brain, calms them down, and the version you tell them should be more objective and have less emotion built into it, which should also calm them down. So this is a great way. This is a great tool for reducing the emotion level that's going on in the room and giving them something to think about other than how unhappy they are. Right. So this is a really powerful one, and that goes along with the next one. Oops. What's going on here? There we are. Which is asking questions. So just like paraphrasing is a really powerful tool. Just like paraphrasing gives you a way to engage them in a different way, questions is even perhaps more powerful because it gives you the opportunity to determine the direction the conversation goes. So, and if paraphrasing is a tool to calm people down and get them to engage the rational parts of their brain, it gives you a chance to reframe the thing a bit less emotionally. Questions is even perhaps more powerful. It causes them to have to think, gives you a way to push the conversation in a particular direction, and it's a great way to reduce emotion. In thinking through their response to your question, it moves them away from feeling so strongly because it's a more rational part of their brain that has to get involved in thinking about the response to your question. Now, it can be challenging because it may be that they don't want to calm down. So they'll avoid answering your question because they don't want to calm down. But let's keep asking, keep calm, keep asking the questions, keep paraphrasing, and that will calm them down over time. These two are also the paraphrasing and ask questions work with all the kinds of difficult conversations, whether it's one where you're going to someone to give them some bad news, it's one where they're in a meeting and they suddenly get unhappy, they think they understand something going on, or when they show up at your office and they have a bone to pick with you. These two tools work in all those kind of conversations, so keep those in mind. Be prepared for bad reactions. Don't fret about them, but just be prepared that there may be people being unhappy, there might be tears, denial, arguments, yelling. You can sort of be ready for that. Just realize that might happen. Sometimes that happens in organizations. There's nothing you can do, and it's not a failure if there's a bad reaction. It's just a failure if you don't manage that reaction well afterwards. So sometimes this will happen. Some people's personalities, they experience emotions very strongly and they express those emotions. Other times it comes from places where they know that they've done wrong or experiences they've had in the past. It's managing that and getting through to somewhere positive. That's success. A bad reaction happens inside of your control sometimes, and that shouldn't be your measure of success. If you are finding yourself getting quite stressed and worrying about a conversation, imagine it's 3 months or even 10 years from now. How important will this conversation have been? How important will the emotion and the disagreement? It will be long forgotten. So you need to have this conversation. You need to get past this point. We need to get past this, and then we need to move on. But 3 months from now, even this will be gone. Right? Okay. So I wanted today to just give you some tools, some new, some additional tools for your toolkit, help you with this skill. I think dealing with these emotion-filled, difficult, crucial conversations is really fundamental to leadership. So I'd really encourage you to keep this in mind, especially if you find these kind of conversations really stressful. Some people, because of their personalities and because of their approach to social relationships, it's much easier for them when there's negative emotion in a conversation. But the other people, and I have a lot of sympathy for you because I'm one of those. If you have a high need for affiliation, if you're very socially oriented, these can be really hard. First of all, lots of people find them really hard. Second of all, a bit of practice and building up these skills, you can be much more effective, and actually they can make you can get to a place where you're much less miserable about them. Don't push them off. Don't put them off if they're crucial, and don't have them if they're not. Make sure you prepare if you can. If they're that, make sure you're thoughtful. The more nervous you are, the more preparation you need to do, even if you don't want to. And I would really encourage you to add this to your personal leader development plan if this is an area of difficulty, because this is somewhere you can get some really great tools and really great approaches and really great ways to do this more effectively. So I hope you wish you great luck with this, and something that I hope you can integrate more into your leadership practice if it's an area of struggle. And if it's not, you're really lucky. Well done. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. So if you have some questions, I'm going to hand it over to. Am I handing it over to you?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to say quick apologies for the sound earlier on, so you won't know who I am. And I am one of the program managers at Imperial College Business School. So I'm just going to scroll through and have a look to see if we have some questions here.
Okay, so
yes, we have one from Simon.
So Simon has asked, how can I encourage my boss, the CEO and fellow directors to have more difficult conversations regarding performance managing the direct reports? This is a difficult thing to do even for yourself. It's even more difficult to do to get other people to do it. I think the main thing is to have a conversation about why is this happening? Why is performance below where we want to be? And would that be helped by getting people to have more direct conversations? I think this probably, it sounds to me like there's some conflict avoidance going on, and also perhaps not a very strong culture of feedback even. So this may not even be so much a difficult conversation. If you're managing someone out, it is performance managing them, but it may be that they just simply don't. People aren't aware of where they are versus where their expectations are for them. So I think you need to have a conversation with your board and your CEO, both about how we create more of a feedback culture, and second, how do we be more target oriented, and how do we make sure we're having those conversations with people. So I think that's really very much you having a conversation, Simon, with your board to get that to happen. I think most CEOs and boards understand that, and if there is a systematic failure to have these conversations, then that requires a change in culture to bring the management team together around the idea that we're holding people accountable, and that's really important. And if you send me an email, I can send you some resources about that conversation. Okay. Can you give examples of what is considered high stakes? This is from Asha. A great question, Asha. High stake is whether it's a high stake conversation if the outcome of that conversation matters materially to you as a leader, right? So is the outcome of that conversation going to actually make a material difference, right? If not, then it's not a high stakes conversation. So if it's a conversation about whether or not someone improves their performance, Simon's conversation, or whether we continue to chase that client where we've tried again and again to go and convince them to work with us, and we keep failing, and you're saying as a leader we have to drop this one now, and they're saying no, we really have to try one more time. I mean, if it's going to take up significant resources, it's going to matter in terms of what you're trying to do as a leader, then it's high stakes. What that means exactly will depend on what you're the leader of, but that's really it. That's what it really means. It's just, is there a material outcome beyond your interest in winning an argument? If the high stake is, I will have lost an argument to this person, that's not high stakes. Right? Losing an argument, that's good for the pub, but it's not what we're trying to do as leaders. So it's whether or not that outcome of that conversation will have a material effect on where you're trying to go as a leader. Okay. So we also have one about which I think is a classic. So Rayhan, fantastic. A personal one: how to tell someone that you don't see a long-term future together. Yeah. So this is, how do you tell someone that you're just not that into them. I think there's a movie and a book about that. And I think that's really, the sooner you tell them and the clearer you tell them, the better. The longer you let it go on, the worse. So the worse it'll be. So I think as soon as you know that's true, it's like always, don't put it off. Now you can say, I mean, I'm not a relationship consultant, I'm not a relationship counselor, but I think if it was me, the sooner they told me, the better from my perspective. And I think that's part of this. Tell people bad news as soon as you can, if that bad news matters, right? And I think that's a really good one. Okay.
And we've got one more question, which is more about sort of reference to a program that we have in the summer, which is about, I saw that there was a coaching component on the program, which, can you tell us a little bit more about that and how it maybe relates to?
Sure. Yeah, well, I think that's a good point in general. So we'll talk about both things. I think that if this is an area where if you have a coach, or if this is an area where you're struggling is managing these difficult conversations, or just managing the kind of personal relationship versus work relationship, any of those kind of things, a coach is a really useful person to engage, or if you have one at your workplace or whatever, they can really help you with these kind of activities, to think through what are you doing, why are you doing it, because a lot of this is about how you relate to other people. A lot of that is about you as a person, so your history, your personality, what you're like, how much you need to be liked. That's not a bad thing, liking to be liked. That makes you a nice person. But that does make a lot of these, when you need to disappoint people or when you need to disagree with people, it can be difficult. Just like speaking up, there's lots of things like that. So coaching can be very valuable for that. One thing I would like to mention, if you're interested in these kind of topics, we do have a program coming up in June, which I'm the program director, one of the program directors on, and we're going to talk about a lot of this stuff. So this is one of the sessions in our leadership program, this kind of stuff around having difficult conversations, and it's a very important theme. And that has a big coaching component where you learn both how to be a coach, but also you get some coaching yourself. And if this is an issue for you, then that's a great thing to use in a coaching context to really challenge yourself. Why do I struggle with this? How can I do it better? And giving my beliefs and my values, what does better look like? Because it's not always clear. I had one boss who seemed, he always felt if he made something, I remember he made someone redundant, and he felt like he'd done a good thing. It was very important for the organization. He got he was energized by this, and I thought it was a bit weird. But on the other hand, that's his personality. He felt like this was something he thought he'd done well at the person. He'd done the best he could for the person. So different people are different. Understanding yourself and understanding how you interact in these situations is a really useful project for you as a leader. Okay, and I think that I'm getting we're out of time signal. So it's been really great talking to you, really great spending some time with you. And thanks you for the great questions. I hope the person with the relationship challenge, I hope that works out for you. This is my email again. If you're interested and you want to pick up on any of these topics, if you have a question you didn't ask or something that comes to you later, do feel free to drop me an email. I always love to hear from people that I've been engaged with on these kind of topics. If you're interested in the program and you want to come and spend some more time with us and go through a lot more leadership development activity in June with us, that would be great. We'd love to have you. So you can either contact myself or Josie. The emails are here and all the information's on the web. So thanks for joining us. It's been really nice to chat about this and love to hear your questions, and really good luck with these conversations. They're such an important part of leadership, and it's an area where a bit of reflection and learning can really help. So good luck, and see you at the next webinar.
Thanks very much, Nelson.